All right. My computer has just clicked over to 1 o'clock, so we'll start, keeping it on time. Thank you everybody for joining this session. This session is the virus crisis. So if this is not the session that you're wanting to go, then quickly dial out and dial back into the other sessions. But hope you stay. We've got 4 fabulously interesting sessions in front of us this afternoon. We will kick off straight away. So the first session is digital disruption in the COVID-19 era, the impact on learning and teaching and the ability to cope in an unknown world. The presenters are Brijesh, Kumar, Kerry Bond and Gabriella Toth, with Trixie just playing support. Good on you, Trixie. Now I can see the screen has been shared, but I can't hear anyone yet.
Hi folks. Our presentation today is on digital disruption in the COVID era, the impact on learning and teaching, and the ability to cope in an unknown world. We are all lecturers in the School of Access Education. Trixie James is the lead researcher who has, very nicely sidestepped away from presenting today. So the presentation will be done by Kerry Bond, Gabriella Toth, myself, as Melissa Drake could not be with us today. We all teach in the STEPS course, which is an enabling course that prepares students for undergraduate studies. Enabling courses need to cater for, enabling courses need to cater for diverse needs of students who require a blend of both core academic skills as well as social and emotional development. STEP students are a diverse, non-traditional cohort. The STEP students are usually from low socioeconomic background. They're first in family to come to university. They're usually returning after a long period away from any sort of formal education. They usually haven't done very well in high school or have not completed high school. Some of them have had not very nice or positive educational experiences previously. Recent migrants, mostly in the metropolitan campuses, the Indigenous students with physical or mental health issues, and quite a few are from remote areas. We're interested in how our STEP students and staff were affected by the university sector rapidly transitioning to online delivery forced by the COVID-19 pandemic. And as the STEPS units are offered on campus, online, and a combination of on campus and online, we were interested in how the pandemic and transition to online delivery affected both students and staff, especially students who were completing and staff who were delivering units on campus when the pandemic struck. Okay, in other words, we have a look at the aim for our project. We were looking at the impact of the transition to online studies due to COVID-19, obviously, for both staff and students. Secondly, we were having a look at the strategies that were employed by staff and students as they transitioned from internal on-campus to online delivery. To do this, we used 2 sets of questionnaires. They were sent to all students who were enrolled in term 1 of 2020, as well as staff who were teaching in term 1 of 2020. We used Qualtrics for this survey. And before we start telling you about the data that we've gained, just wanted to show you some demographics of the STEPS program in general. We have more females than males. Usually there's 1,400 students enrolled in term 1. And as you can see here, that our distance mode is much, much larger than our on-campus modes. But our on-campus modes is usually the largest in term 1. And guess what? The pandemic hit us in term 1. Okay, so I'll stop there and I will let Kerry take you through some of the results that we've found so far.
Thanks, Bridge. Can everyone hear me okay? Just go thumbs up. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Kerry Bond. As Bridge mentioned, we looked at both staff and students, but today we're just presenting our initial findings on our students. Females were more highly represented in our study than exist in our 2020 STEPS cohort, but as Bridge also mentioned, females are typically in reality represented very strongly in STEPS cohorts. We also found that females were also more highly represented in the online group than in the internal group. We looked at study mode and we had about 156 students responding to that question, which is more than 10% of our cohort. So we thought that we're fairly happy with that. A small majority of 51% of those students were already online at the beginning of term 1, with about 40% studying internally. So we're very interested in that 40% and their transition experience. And we also had about 9% who were enrolled in both online and internal units. So while we normally have a very high number of online students, term 1, as Bridge mentioned, has the highest number of internal enrolments compared to other terms, but even so, internal students were still more highly represented in our study than in a typical STEPS cohort over a year. We looked at age, and we found that about 3/4 of our students were aged between about 18 and 40, so they were the lower 2 age brackets that we looked at. And it's probably worth noting that the older age group of 56 plus only had about 4 students as participants in our study. So it was a little bit hard to use those numbers significantly. What we also found, the 26 to 40-year-old group, the second youngest group, was the most highly represented in our online participants. And our 18 to 25-year-olds had the highest representation in our internal group of participants. And then we generally found that all students were concerned. That was probably the highest response as far as the reaction to the pandemic news. And that was in staff as well. Staff had about a 50% concern rate as opposed to 45% of students. And so it was fairly similar across both internal and online students with regard to that. But we did find the highest rates of concern, especially feeling frightened as opposed to just concerned, in the 18 to 25-year-old group. So that's the younger students really tended to feel more frightened than any of the older age groups, which was interesting. So that was about 33% of young students as opposed to a typical 17 to 25% of concern only for the older groups. The older students also demonstrated a high level of skepticism about the pandemic, with most skepticism being seen in those middle sort of age brackets between about 26 and 55 years old. And it's a question mark there whether skepticism may have ameliorated a little bit of that concern that we saw in the younger age groups, but we will need to explore that a bit further as we continue to analyse our data. So we don't really have, we've got to explore that a little bit more. Out of our internal students who had to transition to online learning, almost 50%, as you can see here, were not confident about the transition. In fact, around 65% of internal students were not at least somewhat confident or better. And that obviously has implications for reduced self-efficacy and increased learning anxiety, which, as you're probably aware, negatively impacts learning. We also looked at attendance. I'll get the next slide, thanks. And we found that the majority of internal students who transitioned to online learning claimed to be committed to regular class attendance, with about 69% reporting fairly regular attendance or attending as many classes as possible, which we thought was pretty great because obviously that supports learning. Whether or not that matches with the actual attendance records, we have yet to explore, so we'll be doing that as we look at writing our journal article. Some other things that we found are looking at all students. Some had up to 8 people in their household, which was higher than we saw in the staff households. And that meant that we saw quite a few students claim increased disruption to study from other household members. Compared to online students, we also saw internal students generally feel a lower sense of control over their studies, and internal students were more likely to feel alone. And more internal students also reported internet issues like stability or access that impacted their study. Both groups, online and internal, agreed that they were kept well informed of all changes due to COVID-19, which was good for us to hear back as staff. However, internal students were not as strongly convinced of the university's good communication or the improvement of their own skills. So despite that, one of the key positive findings from our study was that both groups did in fact feel that their online study skills improved in term 1, and Gabby will elaborate a little bit on that. I'll now pass you to Gabby Toth to discuss some of the experiences our students had, such as the impact of home life and homeschooling on study. Thanks, Gabby.
Okay, I can see a slide that I didn't put together. Oh yeah, that's mine. Next one. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriella Toth. I'm going to talk about some of the findings that relate to the 63 respondents who identified as internal students, because they are the ones who signed up for face-to-face classes and had to forcefully transition to online learning in term 1. So we asked students what had been the hardest aspect of their transition to online learning. And qualitative analysis of the responses indicate that the most challenging aspect was the lack of face-to-face interaction, face-to-face contact with peers and lecturers. Lack of face-to-face interaction resulted for most of these students in feelings of disconnection and isolation. One student commented, "I had started to learn how to speak to lecturers and other students without anxiety. I was starting to gain confidence and new friends, but since online study, I feel isolated." Some felt a lack of commitment as a result of not being physical classes to attend, or some sadness about missing out on the social aspects of university, with a student sharing that without building friendships and chatting after class, all the fun had been taken out of uni. Probably linked to the importance of physical contact is that 42% of the internal students agreed or strongly disagreed with the statement, "I felt alone during this time." So we're talking about 42% of the internal respondents, which is huge. The second hardest aspect was to do with the home environment, as these students struggled to find a suitable study space or the time to study among other commitments such as family and homeschooling, and had to put up with noise, but predominantly distractions of all kinds. That's something that came up quite a lot. Some students mentioned technical issues, such as having to share a computer with other members of the household, not having a stable internet connection, or not being familiar with Zoom or Moodle. Personal, intrinsic reasons, such as lack of motivation, mental health issues, poor time management were also mentioned. And a couple of respondents blamed the rapidness of the change, not giving them time to adjust. Finally, a small number of students didn't find anything hard about the transition and were perfectly happy with everything. So it's worth noting that 43% of the internal students found the transition to online overwhelming. And when asked whether they liked studying online, 43% indicated they disliked it, 30% liked it, and 26% were unsure. We also set out to investigate what students had enjoyed about the transition to online learning. And the majority of these students really liked studying from home. Reasons mentioned including comfort and convenience, such as wearing comfortable clothes, not having to spend time or money commuting to the campus, and being able to attend to home family duties while studying. One student said, "I enjoyed being able to attend class and still pick my daughter up from school during class time. I was simply able to join class from my mobile phone." Some of the strategies mentioned by students reveal a conscious effort to establish boundaries between home and uni in the home. So for one student, what worked best was making sure I set up my desk and turned on the computer as soon as I got up, so I knew I had uni. Many students enjoyed developing their technological skills, such as using Zoom and share screens, and quite a few reported having developed their independent learning skills. That was mentioned by quite a few students. Others enjoy the convenience of flexible learning. They mentioned advantages such as doing it when I can, freedom of schedule, working at my own pace, and being able to attend lectures everywhere. Students also highlighted the effort made by lecturers to bring everyone on board with the transition, being available, being supportive. They were encouraged by what one defined as being all in this together, being part of a team. Feeling connected was important. one student commented, "I felt very engaged with my lecturers because, as strange as it may sound, it felt very personal being connected with everyone." Individual and group achievement or resilience were the most positive learning experiences for some students. Some observations include watching others continue their studies and not giving up on their goals, being successful despite adversity. It showed me I can cope in difficult situations, extending myself out of my comfort zone, finding out I'm not as dumb as I thought. Finally, a few students said that they didn't enjoy anything about online learning, or not much. However, a couple of these students mentioned that by the end of the term, they had felt more confident thanks to their lecturers. I was motivated by my lecturers being engaged with my learning and their encouragement for me to achieve good results, one student said. So something that highlights the value of our teaching team is that 83% of the students agreed or strongly agreed that lecturers had provided quality teaching and support. And this was the highest positive response in the survey. Overall, about 60% of our internal students indicated that their online learning skills had improved and that they felt more confident about studying online. So if you remember what Kerry said before, at the beginning of the transition, 48% didn't feel confident. By the end, it was about 60%. So that's a positive outcome. And finally, I want to point out that we had a few converts to online. So some students explicitly said that from now on, they're going to enroll as online students. So these are the main findings of our study, and it's been really interesting to analyze the data, but there's a lot more that we need to do. We have just started, and there's a few other things that we could share with you, but there's no time in this presentation. There's a lot of literature, both on the impacts of COVID, very recent literature, and on online learning that we still have to explore. And we still have to analyze the data from the staff survey. Look for correlations with the student data, and we may follow up with some interviews with students and staff. So our aim is to write one or more articles. We'll see how many we can get for publication in journals. So this is all from us. Thanks for listening, and if there are any questions, we're happy to answer.
Thanks very much to the STEPS team. That was really interesting. It was interesting from my perspective because the STEPS students are already feeling vulnerable because this is, you know, a leap into their future of study, and those who chose online study did so, on-campus study did so quite deliberately, and I can imagine that they would have felt that they had the rug pulled out from under them and wanted just to blame someone and throw their hands up in the air, but it sounds like you've got some really good outcomes. I will open it to questions. If you've got any questions, anyone who's in the room, please just type it into the chat. And if we don't get to it during this brief question time, I'll get one of the presenters to reply in the chat. Also, you'll see that there's a link to the evaluation for this session in the chat. I did have a question. I'm not sure whether it's for you, Gabriella. Do you know what your attrition rate was for term one?
Actually, I looked at the attrition rate. I compared term 1 2019 and term 1 2020, and it was the same. I can't remember the percentage exactly, but that's something that we shared with the team and also with Chris Cook, the head of course, because I thought that I had done something wrong with the stats, you know. But he's much better than me with Excel, and he could confirm that it was okay. And we started, you know, thinking, how is this possible? Because we know that many people struggled. But I think it was compensated by the students who lost their jobs and so thought, okay, study is my best chance of doing something with my time and for my family, etc. So I think that these two things played at the same time. Students, you know, having to withdraw for personal reasons, and others deciding to stay and probably showing more retention, you know, for all of us in because of the same situation, because of having lost their jobs and being at home and, you know, giving it a good shot to their studies.
Thank you very much. I would absolutely claim the keeping the attrition rate the same. I claim that as a victory myself.
Yeah,
so well
yeah,
done.
yeah. We'll see how that relates to term 2. Sorry, Bridge, because term 2 might be different. We see that unfortunately, circumstances that have been getting worse for some of our students, or compounding reasons for students to have to withdraw. This is what we are seeing in term 2, but of course we'll have a better picture at the end of this term. Sorry, Brijesh, I interrupted you.
Oh, I was just going to take all the credit that it was the support and all the brilliant teaching by the STEPS team that made it happen, instead of anything else.
I would absolutely endorse that too. I would absolutely endorse that. Look, thank you very much. We're going to have to wind it up there in terms of time. I appreciate that. If anyone does have any questions, please post it to the chat. We will come back to it, or I'll get one of the presenters to reply in the chat. So thank you very much. Much appreciated.